Good morning, everyone, depending on where you are. This is the ToC show, and in front of me, I have the beautiful face of Graham Scott looking back at me. Graham is the so-called Throughput guy, which is a deserved title. He is a ToC guy, and whether you know what throughput means in the ToC terms or just generally, Graham is his background means he's worthy to put dollar signs in front of the meaning throughput. He is a ToC expert, I guess, from years, taught the thinking processes a lot. And today, Graham, you're going to talk about your use of ToC to get your head around budgeting. I love this topic, but I'm just going to go on mute in a moment and hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Clark. Yeah, I've been a chartered accountant for many years, and towards the end of my chartered accounting career, I sold the practice about 12 months ago. But I decided that I was frustrated dealing with a local council, and it was to do with the budgeting. There's a long backstory that I won't bore you with, and always wanted to do some more study. So I contacted Professor Vicky Mabin at Victoria University and said, I want to use ToC methodology to look at budgeting in large organisations. And we went from there. And this is a summary of what I discovered over that journey. So I presented this to the ToC-Down-Under, but I think I've revamped it a bit so that so there's less words and more pictures. So you're my guinea pig audience for that, I'm afraid. So let's have a look at this and see what we can do. Now, is that sharing all right?
Yep, I can see that.
Hang on, let's slideshow from the beginning. There we are. That's what I wanted. Thank you. Okay, so looking at the problems with traditional budgeting in large organisations and what we can do about it. And I think the first thing we need to start thinking about is, why do we budget in the first place? And we're budgeting, the idea of a budget is so that we can put some numbers towards our strategic direction. We want to be thinking strategically, where do we want to be in 5, 10, 20 years' time? We also need to be able to react tactically as the years unfold and perhaps even during the year. But unfortunately, it seems that the major purpose of budgeting these days is to defend our money, to guard it from waste within the organisation. And there's also a certain amount of compliance involved. The stock exchange wants budgets at the start of the year. Banks want budgets to make sure that you hit your targets. And I think certainly with the banks, there's a bit of back to front cause and effect there. They look at their successful clients and say, oh, they do budgets. Therefore, if we get everyone to do a budget, they'll all be successful, and that will lower our risk. But unfortunately, the mere act of putting together a budget doesn't ensure success. Now, the problem with this traditional method of budgeting is that there are side effects. And some of these are quite major. And the research I did, and from experience, the main problems with budgeting is, first of all, it takes too long. You have your highly paid executives and managers who are spending 2-3 months of the year either putting budgets together or reforecasting or defending what's happening. The second major issue is it wastes money, and I'll explore that a bit further later on. But that's one of the real ironies of budgeting for me, is that it's in place to stop waste and it's actually causing waste. It also causes competition for money. Everyone's fighting over what's perceived as a limited pool, and it builds barriers between departments. If Clark's department and my department have got a project together, neither of us is really that keen to take it on because it might come out of my budget. And I saw this dealing with the local council. We have a large swimming pool complex. It's a big, tall thing, hadn't been washed on the outside for years. And of course, that was causing it to deteriorate. So I was part of a committee that was running this pool on behalf of the council. We asked them if we could get it washed down. They said, oh, yep, that's fine. So we went to the assets department and they said, oh, no, it's parks and reserves. It's a recreation facility, you know, need to go and see them. And you can imagine what they said. Oh, no, it's a building, it's an asset, you need to go and see them. So from an overall council point of view, looking after this facility and making it last makes perfect sense. But because these two departments were worried about the cost coming out of their budget, it took us 18 months to get this thing washed. Ridiculous. We also see the disempowerment of staff. You know what it's like? You've got a great idea, a fantastic opportunity, but there's no money in the budget. Come back next year. Meanwhile, you're looking around at all these projects going ahead that made sense when they were approved 12 months ago, but make absolutely no sense now. And of course, everyone's so busy trying to hit their KPIs and come in under budget that they completely forget about strategy. So these are the main problems, but they're also made worse by some factors that I call amplifiers. So within an organisation, you'll find that the bullies get more money than they should. You'll find that the guys who are good at negotiating get more money than they should. You'll find that the engineers, the IT department, who can bamboozle us poor accountants with all this jargon, they'll get more than they should. And of course, the star performers, you know, the best salesman, got to look after him, so he'll get more than his fair share. Now, I've presented these findings to a couple of national groups of accountants. One was CFOs for corporates, and the others were public sector CFOs. And when I talked about all these problems, everyone nodded their head and, oh, yes, that happens. But when it came down to it, what they really meant is, oh, it happens for all these other guys around me, but we run a tight ship, doesn't happen, not on my watch. So the sort of things that to me highlight that this is really happening is if you're putting a budget target out 12, 14 months before the end of the next financial year, and you are hitting that target dead on, then you're cheating. What you've done is built some buffer into your budget, and then you're carefully spending up to meet it. And this is the sort of waste that I'm talking about. Now, I'm not saying that these guys are going out and throwing parties for their employees after hours and wasting it like that, but it's being spent in areas that are not necessary to the benefit of the whole organisation. So if people are hitting their budgets, that's a sign that something's wrong. There's also this sort of hockey stick thing you see where spending during the year, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, and then boom, in the last couple of months of the year, spending goes up. Now, why is that spending needed then? If it wasn't necessary back here, then why is it suddenly needed there? Well, we'll move on to that, but I'm pretty sure you'll be able to guess what's happening there. I did have one CFO tell me that it was people being conservative and holding back in case they needed it for other reasons. And if he wants to believe that, that's fine. And I think the other thing is when you've got no money available for good projects, good opportunities during the year, and yet you're seeing rubbish opportunities happening at the same time. So we've got all these problems, and this is a quote I love. It's been attributed to Einstein. Whether he actually said it or not, I'm not sure. But the idea here is that you spend time defining the problem, and then the solution will present itself. And I think that's, for those of us who've been involved with ToC, with looking at core conflicts, this makes absolute sense. And you're not just papering over the cracks, putting sticking plasters over the symptoms. So there's two main things I found that were driving this. The bad behaviours from budgeting. One is that there's negative consequences, and the other one is that costs are unpredictable. You don't know how much things are going to cost in the coming year. Now, some are more unpredictable than others, but the reason that costs are unpredictable is that at the start of the year, before it's even started, you've got incomplete information. You've also got your personal biases and experience of the people who are compiling the budget. And then you've got factors that are completely outside your control. The government, the economy, your competitors. So trying to figure out what costs are really going to be, it's just not possible. The effect that this then has is that instead of costs being a nice bell-shaped curve, you know, my department needs $1 million plus or minus 100,000, it's going to be more like my department needs $1 million minus 100,000 plus 2 million. We get this right-hand skew curve there. And what that means is if I want a 50% confidence level that I'm going to hit my budget, I need to be here. If I want to make sure that I have an 80% chance of hitting it, it's significantly more, and 90% is significantly more again. So if people are budgeting conservatively, then they're budgeting probably in this sort of sector here, which means there's a 50% chance that they won't need this money in here. So why would people budget at this level? And the simple answer is there are negative consequences for being wrong. If you're over budget, or if you miss hitting your KPIs, this is what your life starts looking like. Failure to deliver on outputs or failure to deliver within budget means you're seen as an unreliable forecaster, and you're likely to get for missing your targets, which in turn means you'll miss out on promotions or bonuses. If you fail to deliver on outputs or budgets, you'll also spend an awful lot of time trying to justify this, and the time you spend justifying this is time that you're not able to deliver on your outputs. And of course, in extreme cases, you've got this hanging over your head. There's also negative consequences for being under budget. If you're under budget, you miss an opportunity to start spending on next year's, getting a head start on next year's spending. But the big one is this: you risk having next year's budget cut. Now, that's an interesting one because, again, the CFOs I've talked to have all said, oh, no, that doesn't happen around here. And yet all the managers I talk to, they know it's an unwritten rule. If you don't spend your budget, it gets cut. And of course, both of these things put next year's outputs in jeopardy. And once again, you're looking down the barrel of this. So when you've got these two factors, unpredictable costs and negative consequences for being wrong, you get this. If we have negative consequences for exceeding our budget and costs are unpredictable and extra funds protect against uncertainty, then budget holders usually add some contingency. And if budget holders usually add contingency and there are negative consequences for underspending the budget, then budget holders will spend their contingency. And this is where the waste comes in. Now, can you imagine if you're in an organization where at a function level, you've got a budget and you pass it up to the department and they add a bit of buffer, and then it goes up to division and they add a bit of buffer. Then it goes to national and they add a bit of buffer. And perhaps even it goes to regional and they add buffer. So this buffer, this contingency is compounding up through the organization. And if your organization is also using last year as the basis for this year's budget, then that waste is going to start compounding over time as well. So I was a little bit surprised. The research is suggesting that somewhere between 20 to 40% of a large organization's budget is actually wasted because of this spending it just to get rid of it. So yeah, that's big numbers to start talking about. And there's another side of it as well. This is talking about the managers, the people more at the coalface. There's also negative consequences for the board, the CEO, the senior management. They need to hit budget to keep the banks happy. They need to hit budget to keep the share market authorities happy. And if you're in an organisation like a council or a public hospital, it also doesn't pay to come in under budget. If you're a council, you'll be charged with overtaxing people. And if you're a hospital and you come in under budget, well, you'll get accused of not providing the right services. So for the organisation, for the people higher in the organisation, they've got their own negative consequences. Costs are still unpredictable for them. There's being negative consequences of being under and over. So the way they get around that is they want lots of planning and reforecasting. And this is where the waste of time comes from. You spend a quarter of your life at work, perhaps, putting together budgets, reforecasting, and justifying any variations. And when I put all this together, now this is probably a little bit difficult to read. Don't worry about it too much. It's all coming from the extra funds that protect against uncertainty, the negative consequences for exceeding budget, and costs being unpredictable. This is leading to money being wasted and time being wasted. And it's these two things that are in turn causing the barriers to be built between departments. Everyone's competing for a limited pool of money. It causes budget holders to not focus on strategy. They're too busy protecting their own little patch. And it disempowers managers because there's no money available later on during the year. So if these are the core problems, then the way that we solve this has got to be to somehow attack these. Now, extra funds protecting against uncertainty, that to me is just a fact. I don't know whether we can fundamentally change that. It would be nice if there were no negative consequences for exceeding your budget. That I think is going to take a major cultural change within an organisation and also outside the organisation for people like the board and senior executives who are being judged by shareholders and the community at large as well. And for anyone who's tried to change the culture of an organisation, you'll know how difficult that is. So that leaves us with costs are unpredictable. Now, fundamentally, we can't do a whole lot about that. But there's this wonderful idea that's been used a lot throughout the ToC community, and that is central limit theorem. Now, I'm no statistician or economist. My understanding of central limit theorem is that when you take a whole lot of these right-hand skew curves and you combine them, they start tending more towards a normal distribution. So what I mean by that is if I toss a coin, it's 50-50 heads or tails. The more times I toss it, the more we tend towards that 50-50 split. The chances of tossing 5 heads in a row is reasonably small. So if we've got 5 department heads who are tossing their coins in solitude, then they are going to be looking at a worst case scenario and budgeting down here. If we can combine their budgets, then we're going to be looking much more like this sort of shape. We're taking the long tail and we're de-risking this. So what does that look like? If we've got a group of 5 departments, say, or maybe even 5 functional areas within an organisation, this is their budget, this grey area here. We do our usual horse trading thing, and this is what happens. So this is the traditional way of doing it. We then get through the year, and this is what the spending is like, and oh dear, Department 4 have had one of those, 1 in 5, 1 in 10 years, they're over budget. But if we use our iometers, we'll see that the grey unspent area is still more than that. So as an organisation, we're okay, except that we know there are negative consequences for underspending. So when we do get to the end of the year, now this whole group is over budget. If, however, we give people enough money that they're not having to go to the CFO every time they need a new packet of pens, everyone's wages are paid, and we group 20, 30, 40% of the budget together, we get a group buffer that can then be given out in, I suppose, more of an agile sort of a way. As the year goes by, as things turn up that need addressing, they can be addressed. Now, how's the money allocated? The key to getting this to work is that it's not done by the CFO or the CEO, it's done by the people who have contributed to this. Now, if it's done right, we should get the group outcomes that we want. We should have a strategic focus. It should be tactically flexible, even more so than the traditional, 1-year budget. We should make sure that there's no waste. There will be no waste. We'll get better communication because all allocations are decided by the group. And it also empowers employees. They've got access to more money than they've ever had. To make this work, there are some prerequisites. Obviously, everyone needs to know what the strategic objectives of the organisation are. Everyone needs to know how they fit into this. We need a method to prioritise, allocate, and monitoring the spending of this group buffer. And that method needs to be time efficient. It's no good replacing one time drain with something that's even worse. And we also need a way to negate those amplifiers. And I think to a certain extent that will happen when we've got peers around a table. When you've got two engineers at the same table, then it will be a whole lot more difficult for them to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. Now, the biggest obstacles is, of course, going to be culture. I can understand people are very, very keen at the idea of getting their hands on a big pool of money. They just don't want it to be made up of their money. And of course, we still need to keep our customer focus. And this is a bit of bonus stuff that I've been working on since our ToC-Down-Under, inspired by It's Not Luck. And there's a little passage in here. The book, The Goal, is very focused on making money now and the future. Now, that's all about being commercially responsible. We need money to pay our staff and keep them engaged and to keep being able to add value to customers. But we also need to provide a safe and secure environment and satisfying environment for our employees. And we also need to provide satisfaction for our customers now and in the future. So in order to have a prosperous company, we need a constructive culture, secure and satisfied people, because they will add value to our customers will pay us money, and we will then be able to reward our people. And this is a fundamental, one of the reasons that culture, I think, is so difficult, is if we start breaking these down. Now, as a CFO or accountant, I need to be commercially responsible, and increasing the gross margin is a good place to start. Simplest way for me to do that is to increase our prices. I also want to decrease or maintain our costs. And in most organizations these days, spending on people is the biggest cost. So I want to keep a lid on that. Well, fair enough. From an operations sales point of view, we want to increase customer value. So we can increase perceived value by discounting our prices. And most salespeople will tell you that's the only way they can really get a sale. But we also want to increase our service levels. I mean, I can get a hamburger 24/7, and people expect all organizations to be open 24/7. That means requiring our people to be at work longer and longer, to be available over weekends, public holidays, that sort of thing. Now, from the HR manager point of view, we need to have secure people, which means increase our spending on wages. And I think we need to remember that these days, increasing in wages, it's just a hygiene factor. It's not a motivation for people, and the psychologists will say that people aren't motivated by money. They will leave for lack of money, but they won't stay just because of a pay rise. We also need people to be satisfied, and when we're talking work-life balance, for most people, that means spending less time at work. If I could get paid the same amount as a 5-day week and only go for 4 days, I'm in. So when we combine all these together, and you've probably seen this coming, we have a few problems. We have one department wanting to increase prices, one wanting to discount, one wanting to limit spending on people, one wanting to increase the spending, one wanting more time at work, one wanting less time at work. So these are the cultural things that we need to be aware of and thinking about how on earth we can overcome them. And I'm working on, this is my next version of this, the same thing, it's a snowflake model. And when I start adding to that some policies, so we require more time at work, so we have these policies, written or unwritten, that the customer comes first, we must get the job done. Meantime, we want people to spend less time at work, so we have our policy that work-life balance is important and we care about our staff mental health. And not only are these wants in conflict, but we start to see policies in conflict as well. So it's not going to be enough just to fix the budget. We need to go a little bit deeper and look at policies and the customer value and all these other things as well. So that's the end of this presentation. Thoughts?
That was
Clark?
rubbish.
Questions?
Rubbish. A lot of rubbish.
Oh, that's great. That's better than what you said last time.
I know. I took out the rude words because this is going to go into YouTube. It was really good, Graham. Thank you.
Okay.
I've seen a couple of questions in there, but I wanted to ask Jack. I want to give you a little bit of a moment's heads up that I was wondering if you could come into the call in a minute. Would you mind? I need to borrow some of your wisdom. Cool. Thank you. Right. Okay. So come in now. And Graham, this is when we were talking about this all, a lot of the principles you've got there. We're looking at it and we go critical chain. Aggregation, buffers, the curve, all that kind of shape. And Jack happens to be a critical chain expert, as a couple of others on here. I just wondered, Jack and Graham, could you guys just see if you could lift up and just maybe I'm wondering two things. What are the commonalities here between critical chain, just at a high level for the principles? And is there anything that you feel like that's different? And sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I mean, it's a good question.
Sorry,
yeah, go ahead, Graham.
Oh, sorry, Jack. I was just going to say that this is completely borrowed from the critical chain concept. Critical chain, I think that the difference for me is that critical chain tends to focus on time and aggregating those right-hand skew curves for time, whereas I'm saying let's use the same principles but for money. Jack.
And essentially, the old canard about time is money is totally that. If we have
That's a good point.
Project that we think is going to take a year, well, then I need to budget a year. And most, at least knowledge worky kind of projects, most of that budget is time and materials. Okay, yeah, there's probably equipment that you need to buy, but a lot of projects, at least the ones that I work with, it's people time. So the budget for the project is our estimate of the time. If we can operate in a different way and get those projects done faster, then we don't need the same budget for those projects. And that can be held in reserve for the project, either for the great, brilliant idea that comes up 6 months down the road that we want to execute instead, or for the projects that, hey, you know what, these 3 projects are going great. They don't need any extra money, but that project is going to need some of that contingency budget exactly in the way that you just described in this kind of presentation. Now, I think the question of, have I worked with any organizations that have actually successfully done that? I haven't seen it explicitly done, but when your project time budget is can be quicker. You magically get this other budget as well. I think your discussion about where the budget is held is important, because I think the time budget is held by a different group of people than the money budget. I mean, he said eventually it's all held by the same people, but I think the people that hold the time budget feel like they may not have as much control over the dollars budget. So they fight, but the fights are the same. Your conflicts are very similar. I think that was pretty nice. I was like, oh yeah, money, time. And actually a lot of the TOs, a lot of the critical chain conversations, basically they say, yes, time, scope, and budget are sort of the golden triangle of projects, but if you can get the time, the other two work themselves out.
Okay. And I can,
go.
So I was just going to say, one of the issues is, when you've got your budget, you've fought hard for it, it's mine, I'm entitled to spend it. And I'm assuming that you're in danger of getting that same sort of behavior from project managers, which is why you need to take some of it away out of their control. Not make them beg for it, but if they need it, they get it. But if they don't need it, it can be used for other projects.
Well, and this is the when critical chain type implementations work really well, that the budget of time, the buffer at the back end, is for the project as a whole rather than the individual phases or task owners, because the task owners, that curve is totally like it, I'm going to estimate on a duration that I feel comfortable that I can commit to, just like the budget that I can commit to holding myself to that budget. I can commit to that. And if you take away my time, it's totally my time and my, how can I be seen as being reliable? How can I be seen as being a contributing employee? How can I get my promotion, right? I loved how you described that with the budget. It's the same concerns. And the funny thing that I find is that a lot of that is, on the budget, it may be, I'm not as close to budgeting stuff, but for projects, I think a lot of the belief about being seen as reliable is all personal. It's, if I miss my commitment, I will be seen as a poor employee or not contributing to the project. But I don't see, now there are some organizations where if you miss your commitment, you actually get smacked. But most organizations, that doesn't happen. It's all internal. And there's the phone. It's all off to the side rather than it being explicitly being punished. And I think the idea of the budget, the time budget in the context of a project buffer, is when the team can see it as being ours rather than being mine. It really changes the conversation, because then we think about, well, how do we save that budget so that when we can have it when we really need it, as opposed to burning it all the way through all along. So some fun conversations there.
Hey, can I just add a little analogy here that my wife makes really nice roast potatoes, and my children know that I like really nice roast potatoes. So forever, she's just sleeping next door actually, because she's a teenager now, but when and it's only 9:20 in the morning, but when forever, when we sit down at the table, even like when she was like 4, we'd sit down for dinner and she'd look at the roast potatoes and she would hoard. She would dive in and grab 4 of them, even though she could only eat 2 at that stage, and she'd grab them, she'd pop them on her plate, and she would hoard them. And then I look across, and the other daughter was doing the same. And I would do the same. We'd all end up hoarding because we were worried that we'd miss out. And then we'd end up with a surplus of roast potatoes. Well, actually, I always managed to eat them. But there's that horrible kind of that scarcity thing where we're worried we're going to miss out as well. So I think that general, we're hardwired to be worried about scarcity and missing out. But if you're buffering and it's clear that you're safe, it diminishes that scarcity and the hoarding reaction, because you know you don't have to hoard. But it's still very, very, I think there's a lot of hard wiring in us, come from evolution and etc. Yeah.
Oh,
Hey,
I think, sorry, Clark, I was just going to say that I think that hoarding is, what we're talking about is taking the individual buffers that are in each budget, and whether it's a time budget from a project management point of view, or whether it's a money budget, and we're just grouping them together so we can take advantage of that central limit theorem. But that's exactly what people are doing. As you say, we're hardwired to create buffers, and all we're talking about doing is combining them.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a whole shed of toilet paper out the back there that we didn't need. Well, not yet. Well, I'm sure we'll get through it one day. You know, that's something to look forward to.
Well, there are those that say you are full of...
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Right. Hey, I was wondering, David Rollison, could you, I noticed you put your microphone on before. Would you mind? Cool. Thank you. Sorry for putting you on the spot. I presume you wanted to say something.
No, I'm happy to join the club. I mean, it's so. I mean, just to give you a bit of background, I work for WiseTech Global previously. You know, I'm you know, Peter Thorby and I have met in the past, and if anybody knows Viago, then you know what great things they do. But you know, I worked for WiseTech Global for 8 years, and they basically had one rule: we don't do timelines and we don't do budgets. And their productivity throughput was through the roof. And I've joined a new company. I'm not going to mention who they are, but I sit there and I do you know, UDI sessions with them without calling them UDI sessions.
Yeah.
And they're sitting there and they get to it's amazing. They get to the problem and they get to the solution that the actual problem is we have budgets. And the second problem is we have timelines. And the third problem is we have people that have command and control behaviors. And I'm sitting there, well, I knew this before I even started this session. So what are you going to do about it? And they go, well, we can't possibly not have budgets. I went, well, why not? You've all identified that the root cause of productivity issues is having a budget, because we're spending hundreds of thousands of pounds developing doing analysis to create a budget before a development goes ahead, which is more than the cost of the actual development itself. So but they can't get to grips with it. And it's, as I said, I'm only 2.5 months into this organization, but you know, it's really interesting to watch the behaviors. And then you watch the command and control behaviors that go, yeah, but I have to control the budget.
Yes.
And I go, but why do you have to control the budget? And they go, I don't know, because I should. Yeah, but why? And then they're utterly stumped, and it's absolutely hilarious to watch this happening.
It's tricky for them, isn't it? If you remove something that's standard practice, it's very unsafe for them.
Absolutely. I'm sitting at IT strategy meetings that probably cost £10,000 an hour to run, and I'm saying, why are you asking for budgets? And they're looking at me as if I'm a complete moron. And I'm going, well, £10,000 an hour, guys, for this conversation, and you can't tell me why you want budgets.
It's so frustrating, isn't it? When you come in and you can clearly see an alternative that's better, but other people, you know, they might even see the logic of the situation, but their instincts tell them, hang on, if I do that, I'm going to stand out from the crowd. There's an odds it might go wrong. And as you had on one of your slides there, Graham. You know, it could be detrimental to my career to be the one that does something different. I know you're not asking for advice, David, but keep at it. Just go slowly. Here in tortoise.
I've
and all that
had
kind of stuff.
a lot of advice. I have such great mentors. You know, you got Pete Thorpe, you got who knows James Powell here. Yeah. So I'm a long-time friend and colleague of James Powell, who's provided me a load of experience over the last few years, and Viago, of course. And you know, it's obvious. That's the thing in all of it. It's obvious, but people refuse to accept the obvious, and they're scared of the obvious. And this is the big thing in how to, you know, when you're trying to describe some of these methods of working, is how to point out the obvious when they're going, yes, but I need to control this. Yeah, but why do you need to control it? Yeah, Peter.
This session of nearly an hour has been an epiphany for me, because I've never connected budgeting with the term command and control before. And the moment I saw it, it just smacked me right between the eyes, because with that comes all the crappy behavior. And so in this club that I'm in, the crappy behavior that's going around the management committee at the moment is off the charts. And we're getting all this command and control noise coming up. We've got to have budgets, we've got to have this, we've got to have that, we've got to have employment contracts so we can beat the employees up with. And it's all this command and control. And seeing those words attached has been a massive epiphany. And now I can bundle the whole conversation together as, look, budgeting's a form of command and control. That explains that. Just about explains everything that Graham was talking about, and that's what it's all about. It's a method to control. Now the problem is when you say to people, well, if we're not going to command and control, what are we going to do in order to manage this organisation? Trouble is, people have got no idea.
Well, no, they have a breakdown.
Yeah, they don't know how to manage variation in an organisation such that it runs smoothly and achieves the goals without command and control behavior. And that I believe is a major problem. So the whole thing about leadership, people, you get natural leaders, but people don't really know how to lead. They've never been taught to lead. And the only management behavior they've ever learned is probably from their parents or their father who's been in business or their mother who's been in business. And that typically was command and control. So they carry these behaviors on into everything. And like there's the real leaders, and I don't know when you'd call these guys true leaders or visionaries or whatever, but your Musks and your Bransons, and then even your Richard Whites and those sorts of guys, you know, there's natural leaders, and then there's people like probably a bit like me that came through command and control and then had to actually stamp it out. So I had to consciously become aware of when I was doing command and control behaviors and go, stop doing that, find a different way. And that's when all the antecedent behavior consequence type thinking comes in order to develop this new way that you behave yourself that leads into leadership. And I think all that's connected into Graham's budget conversation.
One of the things that Richard White realized, that command and control behavior was bad. He stomped on himself for having that behavior, and is now the 13th richest guy in Australia. He realized that budgets and timelines were just bullshit, and just decided to get rid of them and just not work in that method. And he created an organization that could move, 5, 6, 7 times quicker than any other organization, and people couldn't work out why.
Can I just interject there? So a lot of us have, had involvement with WiseTech, and it's a really interesting thing. So if they're not focusing on managing, budgets and down to the fine details and stuff like that, where's their focus then? So we've just got a different focus.
Just to give some background, I ran and designed their entire IT architecture and cloud delivery platform. So the entire thought of WiseTech is there is only one interest in the company, the one thing that runs everything that they do, and that is, how do I improve productivity? That's it. That's the only thing that the company is interested in. How do I improve productivity and how do I improve quality? Nothing else counts within the organization. They don't give a shit about budgets. They don't give a crap about anything else. It is all about how do I increase throughput and how do I increase quality. That's it, because with an increase in quality becomes an increase in productivity. That's it. They're not interested in anything else.
Jack, do you want to say something?
This idea, particularly in a knowledge work company like WiseTech, is clearly almost all knowledge work. The faster you get something done, the more you make money on it.
Absolutely.
And whether it's an internal improvement project or it's something that you're selling to a customer, the sooner it's done, the sooner you make money on it, which is all throughput. I did the same thing with a furniture. It's my favorite little story because it's like two people in a furniture repair store, and they were having the same problem. They were taking in all these projects and working on all of them and not making any money because they had all this furniture that was half built up and down the stairs, sitting in the window. And we said, look, just decide to work on two pieces at a time. Or it was sort of 2 orders at a time to get them out the door. And it helped them just to change the mindset of the flow through the shop.
So can I just sneak in there and just try and put good old fashioned ToC terms around this? But budgeting is cost world because it's focused on managing the cost, which is, good. We if we overspend and go crazy and don't make any money, that's not good. We die. But what you guys are describing, Dave, Jack, Graham, is you're looking at the costs, you're letting people behave, but the focus is on the throughput world. I think, and you use the word, David, WiseTech are focusing on productivity and throughput. And throughput in a commercial place has got dollar signs on it. And hence, like I was saying, Graham is the throughput guy. That we don't just want to produce stuff and be productive. We actually want to produce stuff that turns into dollar signs, and of course other currencies are available. But it's that different in mindset. I think that it's took me a long time to get it from. But you read a lot of ToC stuff, or you read a lot of any improvement stuff. But it's only when you lift it up and change your focus to say, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve commercial productivity. We're trying to make money. We're trying to go out there and do good for customers. And I think, Graham, what you've described here is a lot of behaviors that would actually slow that down. As well as the 20%, say, money that's wasted in budgeting, you're also slowing down the making of money and the serving of customers, the treatment of patients in hospitals. So sorry, I've kind of, if you don't know it and you listen to it, throughput world is kind of like this world of abundance, not woo-woo abundance, it's focusing on bringing more in, doing more good. The cost world in Ellie Goldrat's term was focused sort of more inward and looking at controlling and focusing on the cost of things. And when you flip from one of those mindsets to the other, you end up, everyone gets better off. And the cost stuff doesn't become totally irrelevant. Otherwise, we wouldn't care about doing budgets better. But it enables the top line, the making money. Could someone bounce off that, because I haven't used those words for a long time, and I
just a couple of examples of where I've used it with clients, and this might even be something to think about for you, David, is if you look at your basic budgeting as how much does it cost us every day to keep our business open? And that becomes a simple target that you need to beat on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, depending on how things are. And that gives people enough control that they can then make decisions from there. And if your, whatever your cost is, you know, 50,000 a day or something like that to keep open, and if you've got $1 million in reserve, then you know you've got 20 days before you have to start making more money. And if you're making 40,000 a day and 50,000 expenses, you've got 100 days of.
So it's interesting. If we take this back to the ToC world, there's only one metric that I use in the organization that I work for, and what is the unit cost of throughput?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, you know, whatever we define as a unit item of throughput, I want to do it less the following month, whilst maintaining or improving quality. That's the only metric I use. And, you know, we have all these different metrics we have in the company, of which I've scrapped all of them, because the only one thing I'm interested in is unit cost of throughput. Nothing else is valid within the organization. I mean, we have metrics coming out of our butts, but it's all meaningless.
Yeah.
You know, as I said, unit cost of throughput and reports that change behaviors. Those are the only two things I'm interested in.
Yeah. And
nothing else is relevant.
I was going to say, all those other metrics will be just like the policies I was talking about at the end of the presentation. They will start to conflict with each other.
Absolutely. And they don't serve any purpose. But you spend a fortune creating metrics that nobody does anything with. You spend a fortune creating reports that nobody looks at. But none of it is going to change the behaviors of anybody within the organization. So why are they doing it?
Yeah. Right. And that's one of, so I was just going to say, one of James Powell's sayings, I'm not sure if it's an original, but he says the only reason you measure something is to change people's behaviors.
That's the exact, that's who I learned that phrase from, and that's the phrase I use every day. And it was James who told it to me. But he's absolutely correct.
Yes.
If a report does not change behavior, there is no point in having that report built or run or produced or sent to anybody.
Unless you're paid to make reports.
Well, that's true.
Can I just think back, we've got a few questions here. Jim, it's just a comment come from Jim Price, not Jim Boyd, who's looking very wise sitting there at the moment, Jim. So Jim Price, the concept of no budgets, no timelines, no command and control suggested an organization understands that improving the flow of agreed upon aligned work will positively affect the organization's bottom line. Yes, and then question mark, yes, anything less is just noise. So if you're reading that, I'll just read out the bits there. So the concept of not doing budgets, so if we didn't do budgets, if we didn't have command and control, if we didn't have timelines, and I'm probably reading that incorrectly, then we would need to be focused on that top line of the flow of whatever produces the value. Sorry, I think I missed my reading up of that out, so we'll move on from there. Apologies. Okay, hey, look, unless you're all desperately keen to carry on and ask a last minute question, I'd love to wrap up. I'm just looking at the faces that are coming through. I think we're looking. Yeah, hang on. Peter's just said you get a long way with just doing what makes sense. Always got to have the clever last word, Peter. I like that. Right. Okay. So now I'm going to wrap up. Do this here next week at a different time. It'll suit you guys in the States. It'll suit you guys in Australia and New Zealand. we've got someone speaking from Japan, and his name is Derek. He works in aircraft maintenance at the US Air Force based in Japan. And he's going to talk about what they're doing on the ground. And I presume it's going to have something to do with airplanes. Don't know much more than that. Derek.
Well, clearly it's trying to fix the F-16 that crashed on the aircraft carrier.
We might do that as well. We'll come up with a current reality tree that will help fix that. Yeah. So Derek's going to join us. The timing is later in the day. So it'll be 1 p.m. New Zealand time, 11 a.m. Australia, and it's in the afternoon. I think it's about 7 o'clock your time, Jack, something along those lines. So you'll find that interesting, but it'll be on YouTube. Anyway, now I just wanted to come up with a little advert for Mr. Graham Scott's book. If you haven't seen it already, it's really, really, really good. Practice makes profit. So you just pop that out. What I love about this is it's ToC for ordinary people. And it's just, it's stories, it's useful, it's a coherent narrative that runs all the way through, and it kind of teaches you the ToC without needing great big factories or complicated situations to kind of get the message across. It's so practical, so real easy. Thank you, Jim. Jim's put in there. Nice read. It's really good. I know you, obviously I've got a paperback copy here, but you can get paperback or Kindle versions on Amazon, and it's this thick, which it's a beautiful little read. So go do that. Graham is sitting there looking very modest. He has no need to be modest. It's a really good book. And yeah. So I'm just going to say thank you everyone for tuning up. It's lovely to see all your smiling faces. Thank you, Graham, for that. Yeah, really lovely. And I know you've also got a high level white paper if people want to have a look at that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you've got the original research and somewhere that you shared it once. Are you willing to share that again?
Oh yeah, I think the 40,000 word thesis is on. It's publicly available if you search my name. You'd have to be very dedicated to want to read that. I wouldn't recommend it particularly. It's
I wouldn't recommend it either. Nothing personal.
It was designed to pass an academic examination. But there's a white paper. Let me see if I can put a link in the chat.
Tell you what, when I email this out, I'll put the link in anyway. Okay. And a link to you. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. I think we'll wrap up in just a few moments. Although if Graham's got that there.
Yeah, I'll just.
Oh, thank you, Chris.